Continuing where I left off, Part 2, Chapter 1. In October 1805, Russian troops were occupying the towns and villages of the Archduchy of Austria, and fresh regiments continued to arrive from Russia, encamping near the fortress of Braunau and burdening the inhabitants on whom they were quartered. Braunau was the headquarters of the commander-in-chief Kutuzov. On the 11th of October 1805, one of the infantry regiments that had just reached Braunau had halted half a mile from the town, waiting to be reviewed by the commander-in-chief. Despite the un-Russian character of the locality and the surroundings, the orchards, stone fences, tiled roofs, mountains in the distance, and the fact that the inhabitants who stared with curiosity at the soldiers were not Russians, the regiment looked exactly like any Russian regiment getting ready for inspection anywhere in the heart of Russia. On the evening of the last day's march, an order was received that the commander-in-chief would review the regiment in marching order. Though the wording of the order was not quite clear to the regimental commander, and the question arose whether or not they were to take it to mean in-field dress, it was decided at a consultation of battalion commanders to present the regiment in dress uniform, on the principle that it is always better to bow too low than not low enough. So the soldiers, after a 30-verst march, without even closing their eyes, spent the whole night cleaning and mending, while the adjutants and company commanders were calculating and counting off, and by morning, instead of the straggling, disorderly mob, it had been on the last day of the march. The regiment presented a well-ordered array of 2,000 men, each of whom knew his place and duty, had every button and strapped in place, and sparkled with cleanliness. And not only outwardly was all in order, but if the commander-in-chief had seen fit to look beneath the uniforms, he would have seen a clean shirt on every man and the required number of articles. The all and all, as soldiers say, in every pack. There was only one matter concerning which no one could be satisfied. That was the footwear. The boots of more than half of the men were going to pieces, but this deficiency was not due to any fault of the regimental commander, for in spite of repeated requisitions, the Austrian authorities had issued him no gear, and the regiment had marched 1,000 verst. The regimental commander was a sanguine, thick-set, middle-aged general with grizzled eyebrows and whiskers, broader from chest to back than across the shoulders. He wore a brand new uniform, still creased where it had been folded, and thick gold epaulets that seemed to stand up rather than lie on his corpulent shoulders. As he walked up and down in front of the line, his back slightly arched, his body quivering at every step, he had the air of a man happily performing one of life's most sacred duties. It was not hard to see that the commander admired his regiment, delighted in it, and that his mind was completely taken up with it. Yet, for all this, His quivering strut seemed to suggest that, over and above his military interest, social life and the fair sex occupied a considerable place in his thoughts. "Well, Mikhail Mitrich, sir," he said, addressing one of the battalion commanders, who stepped forward with a smile. It was obvious that both were happy. "We certainly had our hands full last night. However, they'll do. I don't suppose it's the worst of regiments, eh? It wouldn't be turned off the field, even on the Tsaristan meadow." "What?" At that moment, on the road from town, on which a single man had been posted, 2 men on horseback appeared, an adjutant and a Cossack riding behind him. The adjutant had been sent from the general staff to confirm the previous day's order, which had not been clearly worded, namely, that the commander-in-chief wished to see the regiment in exactly the same condition in which it had been marching, in great coats and with packs, and without any preparation whatever. A member of the Hofkriegsrat from Vienna had come to Kutuzov the day before with proposals and demands that he moved with dispatch to join the army of the Archduke Ferdinand and General Mack, and Kutuzov, considering this coalition inadvisable, intended, among other arguments in support of his view, to show the Austrian general the wretched condition in which the troops had arrived from Russia. This being his object in coming out to meet the regiment, the worse its condition, the more pleased the commander-in-chief would be. Though ignorant of these circumstances, the adjutant transmitted to the regimental commander the explicit order that the men should be in greatcoats and with packs, otherwise the commander-in-chief would be displeased. On hearing this, the regimental commander lowered his head, shrugged his shoulders, and threw up his hands. "We've made a mess of it," he said. "There now, didn't I tell you, Mikhail Mitrich, that in marching order meant wearing greatcoats?" he said reproachfully to the battalion commander. "Oh my God," he added, and resolutely stepped forward. "Company commanders," he shouted, in a voice accustomed to command. "Sergeant majors." "How soon will he be there?" he asked the adjutant, with a deference that ostensibly related to the personage he was referring to. "In an hour, I should say. Have we time to change?" "I don't know, General." The regimental commander, going up to the line himself, ordered the soldiers to change into greatcoats. The company commanders dispersed among their companies. Sergeant majors bustled about. The greatcoats were not in very good condition, and what had been silent, orderly quadrangles instantaneously became a surging, sprawling, humming mass. Soldiers were running back and forth in all directions, pulling their packs over their heads with a jerk of the shoulder, understrapping greatcoats, and raising their arms high and pulling on the sleeves. In half an hour they were back in formation again, only now the quadrangles were gray instead of black. The regimental commander once more stalked to the head of the regiment and surveyed it from a distance. "Now what? What's this?" he shouted, stopping short. "Third company commander! Third company commander to the general! Commander to the general! Third company to the commander!" The words passed down the line, and an adjutant ran to find the tardy officer. By the time these zealous voices, garbling the command till it became general to the third company, reached their goal, The missing officer had emerged from behind his company, and though middle-aged and not in the habit of running, trotted clumsily toward the general, tripping over his feet. The captain had the constrained expression of a schoolboy called on to recite a lesson he has not studied. His red face, the color of which was unmistakably due to intemperance, became malted, and he was unable to keep his lips from twitching. As the captain ran up, panting and slackening his pace as he drew near, the general scrutinized him from head to foot. "You'll soon be putting your men in petticoats. What is this?" he shouted, his jaw thrust forward, as he pointed to a soldier in the ranks of the 3rd Company who was wearing a greatcoat of fine cloth unlike all the others. "And where have you been? The commander-in-chief is expected, and you're not in your place." "Eh? I'll teach you to rig your men out like Cossacks for inspection." "Eh?" The company commander, his eyes riveted on his superior officer, kept stiffening, the 2 fingers pressed to the visor of his cap, as if in this effort alone lay his one hope of salvation. "Well, why don't you say something? Who have you got there decked out like a Hungarian?" the commander gibed harshly. "Your Excellency." "Your Excellency what? Your Excellency. Your Excellency. What about Your Excellency? What are you trying to say?" "Your Excellency, that is Dolokhov, reduced to the ranks," said the captain softly. "Well, was he reduced to the rank of field marshal or private? If a private, then he should be dressed like one, in regulation uniform." "Your Excellency, you yourself gave him permission on the march." "I gave him permission? That's just like you, young men," said the general, cooling down a little. "Permission indeed. One says something to you, and you—" "Eh?" he said with renewed irritation. "Be so good as to dress your men properly." The regimental commander turned to the adjutant, and with his quivering strut moved down the line. Obviously delighted with his own irascibility, he walked through the regiment seeking some further pretext for his wrath. After upbraiding one officer for his unpolished insignia, another for the unevenness of his column, he approached the 3rd Company. "Is this how you stand? What about that leg? The leg!" he shouted in agonized voice, while still 5 men away from Dolokhov, who was wearing the blue greatcoat. Dolokhov slowly straightened his bent knee, his clear blue eyes insolently contemplating the general's face. "Why the blue greatcoat? Off with it! Sergeant Major, change the coat! It's a—" He did not succeed in finishing. "General, I am obliged to obey orders, but I am not obliged to put up with—" Dolokhov hastened to say, "No talking in the ranks! No talking! No talking!" "Not obliged to put up with the insults," Dolokhov concluded in a loud, ringing voice. The eyes of the general and the soldier met. The general was silent as he furiously pulled down his tight stock. "Please have the goodness to change your coat," he said, and walked away. Chapter 2. "He's coming!" shouted a signalman at that moment. The regimental commander flushed, ran to his horse, and, seizing the stirrup with trembling hands, swung himself into the saddle, righted himself, drew his saber, and with resolute, exultant expression, opened one side of his mouth, ready to shout a command. The regiment fluttered like a bird preening its feathers, then stood stock still. "Attention!" roared the general in a soul-shaking voice that bespoke his own joy, his discipline of the regiment, and his welcome to the approaching chief. Along the broad country road, planted with trees on both sides, came a high, sky-blue Viennese calash drawn by 6 horses and rattling slightly on its springs. Behind the calash galloped the commander-in-chief's suite and the convoy of Croats. The Austrian general sitting beside Kutuzov in the carriage wore a white uniform, which looked odd among the black uniforms of the Russians. The calash stopped when it reached the regiment. As he and the Austrian general discussed something in low voices, Kutuzov, smiling slightly, lowered his foot to the carriage step and ponderously descended, just as if those 2,000 men breathlessly gazing at him and at the regimental commander did not exist. A command rang out, and once more the regiment vibrated, as, with a clanking sound, the men presented arms. In the dead silence that followed, the feeble voice of the commander-in-chief was heard. "Long live your Excellency!" the regiment roared, and again froze. At first, when the regiment was in motion, Kutuzov stood on one spot. Then he and the general in white, accompanied by the suite, went on foot through the ranks. From the manner in which the regimental commander saluted Kutuzov, obsequiously standing at attention with his eyes glued on him, and from the way he could hardly control his quivering movements as, leaning forward, he followed the generals and trotted up at every word or gesture of the commander-in-chief. It was clear that his duties as a subordinate were executed with even greater delight, and as duties as a commanding officer. Thanks to the discipline and diligence of his commander, the regiment was splendid. The regiment was in splendid condition compared with the others that had reached Braunau at the same time. The sick and stragglers numbered only 217. Except for the boots, all was in good order. Kutuzov walked through the ranks, now and then stopping to say a few friendly words to officers or even privates whom he had known in the Turkish campaign. Several times, when looking at their boots, he shook his head sadly and pointed them out to the Austrian general with an expression that seemed to say that he was not blaming anyone, but could not help seeing how bad things were. Each time this happened, the regimental commander darted forward, afraid of missing a single word the commander-in-chief might say concerning the regiment. Behind Kutuzov, at a distance that made it possible for them to hear every faintly uttered word, walked in his suite, which consisted of some 20 men. These gentlemen were talking among themselves and occasionally laughing. Nearest of all to the commander-in-chief walked a handsome adjutant. This was Prince Bolkonsky. Beside him was his comrade Nesvitsky, a tall staff officer, extremely stout, with a handsome, smiling, good-natured face and liquid eyes. Nesvitsky was scarcely able to restrain his laughter, which was provoked by a swarthy hussar officer walking near him. The officer, without smiling or changing the expression of his eyes, stared solemnly at the regimental commander's back and mimicked every move he made. Each time the general started and bent forward, the hussar started and bent forward in exactly the same way. Nesvitsky was laughing and poking the others to make them look at the wag. Slowly and languidly, Kutuzov walked past thousands of eyes that were starting out of their sockets in an effort to follow the chief. On reaching the third company, he suddenly stopped. His suite, not foreseeing this halt, almost bumped into him. "Ah, Tamamukin," he said, recognizing the red-nosed captain who had been made to smart on account of the blue greatcoat. One would have thought it possible for a man to stand any more rigidly at attention than Timokhin had stood when he when being reprimanded by the regimental commander. But the moment the commander-in-chief addressed him, he drew himself up till he looked as though he could not possibly have sustained the posture had the commander-in-chief gone on looking at him much longer. Kutuzov, understanding the captain's position and wishing him nothing but good, quickly turned away, and a barely perceptible smile flitted over his puffy face, which was disfigured by a scar. "Another Ismail comrade," he said. "A brave officer. Are you satisfied with him?" he asked the regimental commander, and the general, unaware that he was being reflected in the hussar as in an unseen mirror, darted forward and replied, "Very much so, Your Excellency." "We all have our weaknesses," said Kutuzov, smiling and walking away from him. He had a predilection for Bacchus. Fearing that this was something he might be blamed for, the regimental commander made no reply. Just then the hussar noticed the face of the red-nosed captain, with his stomach pulled in, and mimicked his expression and posture so perfectly that Nevsky was unable to stifle a laugh. Kutuzov turned around. With perfect control of his features, the hussar managed to get in a grimace as Kutuzov turned, before assuming the most innocent, serious, and respectful expression. The third company was the last, and Kutuzov, apparently trying to recollect something, stood lost in thought. Prince Andrei stepped forward and, speaking softly, said in French, "You instructed me to remind you of the officer Dolokhov, reduced to the ranks in this regiment." "Where is this Dolokhov?" asked Kutuzov. Dolokhov, who had changed into the grey greatcoat of a private, did not wait to be called. The trim figure of the bond soldier with the clear blue eyes stepped out of the line. He walked up to the commander-in-chief and presented arms. "A grievance?" asked Kutuzov, frowning slightly. "That is Dolokhov," said Prince Andrei. "Ah, I hope this would be a lesson to you," observed Kutuzov. "Do your duty. The Tsar is merciful, and I shan't forget you, if you merit it." The clear blue eyes gazed at the commander-in-chief as boldly as they had gazed at the regimental commander. Their expression seemed to tear aside the veil of convention that placed so great a distance between a commander-in-chief and a private. "One thing I ask of your Excellency," said Dolokhov deliberately in his firm, ringing voice. "I ask that I be given an opportunity to expiate my guilt and prove my devotion to His Majesty the Emperor and to Russia." Kutuzov turned away. There was the same twinkle in his eyes as when he had turned from Captain Timokhin. Then he knit his brows as if to say that everything Dolokhov had said, or could have said, he had long since known, that it worried him and was not at all what was required. The regiment broke up into companies and moved on to quarters not far from Branu, where they hoped to receive boots and clothing and to rest after their arduous marches. "You don't hold a grudge against me, Prokhor Ignatievich, do you?" said the regimental commander, overtaking the third company on its way to quarters, and riding up to the Captain Timokhin, who was walking in front. Now that the review was successfully over, the general's face expressed irrepressible delight. In the service of the Tsar, one can't help, and inspection sometimes puts you off. Am I the first to apologize? You know me. He was very pleased, and he held out his hand to the captain. "Don't mention it, General, as if I make so bold," replied the captain, his nose growing redder as he broke into a smile which revealed the loss of 2 front teeth that had been knocked out by the butt end of a gun at Ismail. "And you can't let Dolokhov know that he doesn't have to worry. I won't forget him. But tell me, please, I've been meaning to ask you, what about him? Is he behaving himself? In general, is he? As far as the service is concerned, he is most punctilious, Your Excellency. But his character—" "What about his character?" asked the regimental commander. "It's different on different days," replied the captain. "One day he's sensible, intelligent, good-natured, and the next day he's a wild beast. In Poland, if you please, he nearly killed a Jew." "Well, well," said the regimental commander. "Still, one must have pity on a young man in trouble. He has important connections, you know. So you just—" "Yes, sir, Your Excellency," said Timokhin, showing by his smile that he understood the commander's wish. "Ah, yes." The regimental commander sought out Dolokhov in the ranks, and, reining in his horse, said to him, "After the first engagement, epaulets." Dolokhov glanced up, but did not say anything, nor was there any change in his mocking smile. "It went well," continued the regimental commander. "A round of vodka for the men from me," he added in a loud voice so that the soldiers could hear him. "I thank you all. God be praised," and he rode on to the next company. "You know, he's really a good fellow. It's not bad serving under him," said Timokhin to the subaltern marching beside him. "In other words, the King of Hearts," said the subaltern with a laugh. The regimental commander had been nicknamed the King of Hearts. The jovial mood of the officers after the review was communicated to the soldiers. The companies marched cheerfully. Snatches of conversation were heard on all sides. "Didn't they say Kutuzov was blind in one eye?" "That's right, completely blind." "No, brother, he's sharper eye than you are. Boots, row leggings, he didn't miss a thing." "When he looked at my feet, friend, well, thinks I, and that other one, the Austrian, that was with him, he looked as if he'd been rubbed with chalk, white as flour. I expected they scoured him up like they do the guns." "Hey, Fetisho, did he say when the fighting would begin? You were standing near him. They say Bonaparte himself is at Brunovo." Bonaparte listened to the fool. What will he think of nets? The Prussians are in revolt, and the Austrians, don't you see, are putting them down. When they put them down, then the war with Bonaparte will begin. And he says Bonaparte is in Brunovo. That shows what a fool he is. Better keep your ears open. What devils these quartermasters are. Look, the 5th Company's already turning into the village. They'll have their gruel all cooked before we even get there. Give us a rusk, you dog. And did you give me any tobacco yesterday? Exactly, brother. Well, never mind. Here, take it. They might have called a halt. Now we have another 5 versts to go before we can eat. That was a real treat when the Germans gave us a lift. Just riding along like that. Not bad. The people here are a dim-witted lot, friend. Back there they all seem to be Poles, all under Russian crown. But here, brother, you get nothing but Germans. Singers, forward, came the captain's orders, and out from the various ranks ran some 20 men. The drummer, their leader, turned round to face the singers, waved his arm, and they struck up a long, drawn-out soldier's song, commencing, "Morning dawn, the sun was rising," and ending with the words, "Oh then, brothers, on to glory with Father Kamensky." The song had been composed during the Turkish campaign, and now that it was being sung in Austria, Father Kamensky was changed to Father Kutuzov. Rapping out these last words in martial style and waving his arms as if he were flinging something to the ground, the drummer, a lean, handsome soldier of 40, screwed up his eyes and sternly surveyed his singers. Having satisfied himself that all eyes were on him, he raised both arms as if carefully lifting some invisible but precious object over his head, and holding it there for several seconds before impetuously flinging it down. "Oh, my bower, he began. "My new bower." The 20 voices caught up the refrain, and the man playing the wooden spoons, despite the burden of his equipment, nimbly bounded forward and walked backward at the head of the company, twitching his shoulders and clacking his spoons as if he were menacing someone with them. The soldiers, swinging their arms in time with the music, strolled along, spontaneously falling into step behind the company. The sounds of heels, of creaking springs, and horses' hoofbeats were heard. Kutuzov and his suite were returning to town. The commander-in-chief made a sign for the men to continue marching at ease, and he and all his suite looked as though they enjoyed the sound of the singing, the spectacle of the capering soldier, and the gay and briskly marching men. Conspicuous in the second file from the right flank, the side on which the carriage was passing, was the blue-eyed soldier, Dolokhov, who was swinging along with particular grace, keeping time to the song, and looking into the faces of those driving by as if pitying all who were not at that moment marching with the company. The hussar cornet in Kutuzov's suite, who had mimicked the regimental commander, fell back and rode up to Dolokhov. Hussar cornet Zherkov had at one time belonged to the wild set in Petersburg, of which Dolokhov was the leader. When he met Dolokhov abroad as a common soldier, Zherkov had not seen fit to recognize him, but now that Kutuzov had spoken to him, he addressed the degraded officer with the cordiality of an old friend. "My dear fellow, how are you?" he asked through the singing, walking his horse abreast of the company. "How am I?" responded Dolokhov coldly. "As you see." The lively song gave a special flavor to the tone of free and easy geniality with which Zherkov spoke, and to the studied coolness of Dolokhov's reply. "And how do you get along with your officers?" "All right, they're good men." "How did you manage to worm your way onto the staff?" "I was attached. I'm on duty." Both were silent. "She loosed the hawk from out of her right sleeve," went the song, arousing a spontaneous feeling of courage and good cheer. Their conversation would probably have been different but for the effect of the song. "Is it true that the Austrians have been beaten?" asked Dolokhov. "God only knows. That's what they say." "I'm glad," retorted Dolokhov, clearly and briskly as the song demanded. "What about coming around some evening? We'll have a game of faro." "Why, want to get rid of some money?" "Do come." "I can't. I've taken an oath. I won't drink or play till I've been promoted." "Well, that won't be before the first action." "We shall see." Once more they were silent. "Well, come if you need anything. One can always be of use when he's on the staff." Dolokhov smirked. "Don't trouble yourself. When I want anything, I won't ask for it. I'll take it." "Oh, well, I only too. Goodbye. Good luck." And high in the air and far away to my native land, Zherkov touched his spurs to his horse, which pranced spiritedly several times, not knowing which foot to start on, then galloped past the company and overtook the carriage, keeping time with the song. And I'm going to leave it off there. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You can subscribe. There's a subscribe button down here on that side here, down here. If you like, add me to your playlist if you like. If you have any suggestions, comments, or maybe there's a book you want me to read while I'm reading War and Peace, let me know. Or just keep watching and you don't have to say anything, and enjoy. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.